And we're live.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another DML Commons Salon. It's April 29th, and we're here for the second unit of the four-part Professional Pathways strand of the DML Commons series that is hosted by the DML Hub. So this is the second webinar of our unit around participatory design and community-based approaches. And last week's webinar, Nancy Erbstein and Julian Sefton-Green really set the stage with valuable recommendations for early career researchers who are interested in this line of work. And so today, we'll further discuss diverse participatory approaches and hear about different projects considering questions that really touch on different aspects of research processes from the beginning and until the end, or sort of sustaining those processes. My name is Anna Koine, and I'm a second-year doctoral student at the Learning Sciences program at Indiana University. And I'm co-facilitating this salon with Alicia Blom-Ross from the London School of Economics and Political Science and Melissa Bruff from UC Irvine. I'm super excited to welcome our invited panelists, Joanna Saat-Suolainen, Melissa Butcher, and Sasha Costanza-Chalk, who bring a range of backgrounds and expertise in participatory and community-based research to this conversation today. And I'll just let everyone introduce themselves. Melissa Bruff, would you like to start?
Sure. Hi. I'm a postdoctoral researcher with the Connected Learning Research Network at the DML Hub. And I started in this line of work. I was interested in youth media as a youth media producer myself, and then collaborated with a number of community media projects. And during my doctorate, I was able to actually, Sasha and I worked on a project called Mobile Voices, which was both a participatory design and research project and a community media project. And so I'm really excited to have him with us today and hear as well from our other panelists.
Thanks so much, Melissa. How about Alicia? Would you like to continue?
Sure. I am also a postdoctoral research officer, and I'm working with the Connected Learning Research Network here in London on a project called Parenting for a Digital Future, where we are looking at the expectations and imaginaries and hopes and sometimes fears of parents when they think about what the future looks like for their children, both around digital technology, but also just in general what they kind of anticipate for their children. And in addition to this research, I also sometimes work as an independent evaluator for youth media projects, and this is an outgrowth of my PhD research, which was on civic participation in youth media projects for quote-unquote at-risk young people, where I worked quite closely with a number of participatory video projects for young people in London, and helped build the capacity of those organizations to reflect on and provide an evidence base for program design.
Thanks so much. How about Joanna? Could you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Joanna Saat-Suolainen. I'm a postdoc researcher now at Aarhus University in Denmark. I'm there at the computer science department and also part of another unit called the Participatory IT Center. I come from a very multidisciplinary background. I had a first degree in architecture, so building architecture. Then I moved to digital design and new media. And that's the field where I did my doctoral work on citizen participation. So I argued there that when we talk about citizen participation nowadays, we have to combine different types of participations. Participation in the design of the technology itself, as well as civic participation understood more broadly.
Thanks so much. How about Melissa?
Hi, my name is Melissa Butcher. I'm a reader in social and cultural geography at Birkbeck College, University of London. I've been working as, I guess, a cultural anthropologist, but adopted by geography for about the last 15 years. And I work mostly with young people, exploring questions of cultural change and how young people manage those processes. So most recently I've been working with young people in the East London borough of Hackney, looking as it's an area that's undergoing rapid processes of urban redevelopment, gentrification. So really trying to understand how young people experience those changes.
Thanks so much, Melissa. How about Sasha?
Hi there, I'm Sasha Costanza-Chalk. I'm Associate Professor of Civic Media at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and I'm also a co-founder and worker owner of Research Action Design, or RAD, which you can find at rad.cat. Here's my lower thirds. Uh, that's my name. My Twitter is @shock, and there are some web links. And I'm really excited to join the conversation today. It's great to see you again, Melissa. And yeah, I mean, lots of projects, to talk about that use participatory design approaches. And I'm hoping to talk a little bit later about the Collaborative Design Studio, which is a course that I run at MIT. That's about trying to teach collaborative design processes.
Really great. Thanks so much. It's really exciting to have such a diverse group here today. And so while I'm really interested in maker spaces and the maker movement, I really got interested in participatory design through my work at the Aalto University in Helsinki, collaborating there with my Finnish colleagues as well as teachers and students across Europe to create sort of a participatory design model for educators to design learning activities. And so today's conversation, we will ask Joanna, Melissa, and Sasha to tell us a little bit more about their experiences and sort of specific projects that they've been involved with and that highlight participation. But just a few more things before we get started. So if you are watching this Hangout from the DML Commons webpage, this live stream, as always, we would really like to encourage you to jump on the Etherpad and to chat away and help us take notes, or to join the conversation via the Twitter hashtag DML comments. So we'll be posting resources like the links that Sasha just mentioned in his introduction on the Etherpad during the webinar and also afterwards. And to join the webinar, you can go like right below the live stream. There's a link to the Etherpad, and you can just sort of hop on and add your name to the topmost part of the Etherpad. And so once you opened it, you can add yourself to the roll call. And so we already have a couple of names here joining us today. So if you could add yourself there and sort of also, post suggestions for discussion topics or pose questions and relevant resources on the Etherpad to add to the shared collection of resources around this topic. And further, we'd really like to encourage you to jump on Twitter and share and promote examples of participatory and community-based research there as well. Throughout the week and throughout last week, a couple of examples were already shared. And just to add to this collection, post to Twitter using the DML Comments hashtag and joining the conversation there. So we'll compile the list of projects later on in a blog post and circle that back to you. So to get started today, we prepared a small warm-up activity before we jump into the conversation with Joanna, Melissa, and Sasha. And so I'll now hand over to Alicia to run you through this activity.
Okay, so without wishing to focus on the negative, we thought that it might be helpful to explore a little bit where we're all at and also identify some challenges to doing participatory research. But seems like we've lost our warm-up. Where's it gone? Oh, there it is. Okay, so if you scroll down past all the red text at the top and find the question that says, this is now on the Etherpad for those of you who haven't yet seen the link, and that's on the DML Commons website just underneath the stream that you're probably watching. And it says, what are the biggest challenges you faced or imagine that you might face in doing participatory or community-based research and/or design? So I'm going to ask everybody, if you haven't done already, to add a +1 or even any comments next to any of the kind of drop-down menu of different kind of challenges that you might face. And perhaps we'll see if there's any really kind of common sticking points for those of us who didn't work in this area, or particularly salient concerns for those of you who are getting started. And again, feel free to add, as Sasha is currently doing, any others that aren't listed above at the bottom of the list. So pretty much looks like everyone has added a +1 for time, which we'll come on to in a minute. how to balance the time that it takes to do participatory research with the other requirements that you may have as a PhD student or as a full-time faculty, other service commitments you have, writing commitments, and how to find the appropriate amount of time to do this kind of research, which, as we know, can sometimes be time and labor intensive. So, let's see. I added a comment on collective analysis because I think this is a really interesting question. I've never really done that much of the analysis with the participants in participatory research, and so I'd be interested to hear from those of you who have. Okay. So, building the social relationships and networks needed. A few people have been struggling with this. I'm going to add another +1 to getting the work published, because how to write about the sometimes messy and multifaceted needs of participatory research in a way that is kind of legible to people who are not part of the process is sometimes a challenge. Okay, so unless there's any final ones here, I think we'll move on to the discussion, but just to summarize this, it seems like there's a pretty even spread, although it doesn't seem like actually anybody's particularly struggling with reaching consensus on outcomes and next steps, so perhaps that becomes quite evident as in the process of doing participatory research. Managing relationships can be quite difficult, and reaching consensus on research questions also, interestingly, does not seem to be proving to be difficult. So perhaps our speakers could speak a little bit to how you did come up with the research questions at the start of your project, and how you were able to involve the participants and organizations that you're working with, perhaps in defining what some of those research questions might be. Which may be a good time, I think, to hand over to our speakers.
Great. So we're going to get started. As Anna mentioned, last week we talked with Julian and Nancy about some of the broader issues, themes, dilemmas, opportunities that come up in doing participatory and community-based work. And today we're going to be talking a little bit more in terms of the nitty-gritty and some of the practicalities and sort of the steps that are necessary to go through in developing and implementing these kinds of projects. And so I wanted to start by asking each of our participants today to talk through an experience that they've had, a particular project that they've worked on in terms of kind of how they got started, what the initial motivation was, how they developed the necessary relationships to get the program going, and how they kind of developed a project that would be mutually beneficial. So I think we'll start perhaps with Joanna.
Yes, I think I'll talk to you today about kind of what ended up becoming a long-term project, which was the development of an online map-based tool to support citizen participation in urban planning in Helsinki, in Finland. The project really started in 2006 with it was kind of, it started as an academic project that was externally funded by the EU. And so really the initial research questions came from academia, but also in collaboration with the city of Helsinki. So in that sense, the first steps were really trying to engage members of the city of Helsinki to participate in the project. So that was the first challenge for us. The city of Helsinki at that time, people working there were not really used to the whole concept of participatory design. So they were more used to the idea of, you know, getting some kind of ready-made software that would kind of support some of the needs they would maybe themselves try to spec, or wait for the academics to, you know, to spec them and then and have this software ready. So that was our first challenge: how to get people working at the city of Helsinki to be active participants in the project. Now the second stage was then to how to also involve citizens, residents of Helsinki in the project, so that we can include their input in the design of this online platform. That was also difficult to do, but the way we went with it was to start very locally. So we started collaborating with active citizens and neighborhood associations in particular neighborhoods of Helsinki. And through this very local work with residents, we managed to get participants and their input into this project. One thing we failed to do is, for example, to organize participatory activities where both residents and people working at the city of Helsinki would come together and collaborate and kind of collaborate with us in these participatory activities. The main challenges were really related to, well, first of all, the working culture at that time in the city of Helsinki. People working there thought that, okay, this might not lead anywhere. And the second thing was a very simple question of time. If we were trying to organize collaborative workshops to get these two kind of groups together, but of course those who would be participants coming from the city of Helsinki wanted to come during the day because that would be part of their working hours, whereas residents of course had their own work at that time and would have wanted to participate in the evenings. So these are very simple problems that emerged. Now the project continued over a period of 3 years, and I think what was interesting and what I really liked about kind of the end of this project, well, the end for us because our funding ended, but was that can you still hear me? Yes. So at some point we got to know of some active residents in one neighborhood of Helsinki that had found our prototype for the system that was online at that time and running, and they had decided to use it. So it was the first time for us that whatever we were developing in a participatory fashion was now being used without our push for it. So until that time, we were always pushing for participation. You know, we were always actively looking for participants, trying to, sell the idea of our participatory projects. But at that stage, so it was actually. It was 4 years after the beginning of the project when the platform was kind of up and running. It was a better version, but still. So we got news of that. And at that point, I remember myself going and basically knocking on the door of these active residents and telling them, can I now follow what you are doing? And they said yes. And at that point, they asked for our help, saying, can you help us, kind of developing further whatever we had designed. So what I want to emphasize here is that at some point, if there is enough time, the roles can get reversed. And for example, what we used to be the participatory designers, and we became the ones being participated. So it's something I would like to leave with you for now.
Great. Thank you so much, Joanna. Sasha, perhaps you could tell us about a project you've worked on. And we actually have a question that's come in, and that is, Are there particular points in a project cycle that you do more participatory methods and less at others, and how do you decide? So maybe you can address that in discussing your projects.
Sure. Okay. So I'd like to talk a little bit about a participatory research and design project, which is now called the Transformative Media Organizing Project, but started out a year and a half ago as the Out for Change Transmedia Organizing Project. It has a number of components, including a nationwide study of the strengths and needs in terms of the media capacity of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and two-spirit identified organizations. The project was funded by the Ford Foundation's Advancing LGBT Rights initiative a year and a half ago. And it had two big components. One is the strengths and needs assessment, which is a participatory research process that involved interviews, a nationwide survey, and a series of participatory data analysis workshops. And then it also had a public-facing series of skill shares where folks, community organizers from LGBTQ and Two-Spirit groups could share with one another and with the public the ways that they were using media in their organizing work. And so the way that we sort of organized the project and put it together initially was by convening a group of project partners who were community-based organizations who we thought would be interested in participating in the project and who were working at different intersections of LGBTQ and Two-Spirit identity and other issue areas like racial justice or the prison system or immigration. Because part of the purpose of the project was to decenter the dominance of middle-class, white, gay, male, especially, issues in the public conversation about gay rights. Public narrative being, we've got marriage equality and we can join the military, so we're good, right? And in fact, a lot of the issues that are facing low-income communities and communities of color, don't have anything to do with those or approach them from a different space. So access to health, housing, education, the growing prison system, these are all queer issues as well. And so we wanted to understand how these groups were using media and integrating it into their work. And so the way that we developed the research questions and the methodology is a little bit of a mix, which I think happens a lot in participatory research and design projects, which is that on the one hand, there's a research team coming from MIT and also from Research Action Design with a particular set of questions that we have, broad research questions, right? Which is what do groups need to more effectively do cross-platform media work. But then in terms of what the specific questions are going to be, what the survey instruments can look like, what the semi-structured interview guideline looks like, all of those things were developed through a process that involved the six organizations that were partner organizations, as well as sort of a group of advisors that we also gathered. So yeah, I mean, we developed the plan for the overall project, those research instruments together with the partners. When it was time to do data collection and get the survey out there into the world, that's something that also the community organizations that were partners were very involved in pushing it out through their networks. That's how we got, I think, the response that we did. And when we had our preliminary results from the survey, especially, we did this workshop, which is called the data gallery, which is basically just printing out large format versions of some of your preliminary findings in easy to read or understand sort of infographic style, simple charts and tables, and pasting them up on the wall in clusters around a space. We did a participatory data analysis workshop, the data gallery, at the Allied Media Conference in Detroit last summer with our project partners and some of our advisors. And that's a chance to kind of get feedback from folks who are involved in the process on, well, what was surprising to them and where do they think crosstabs need to be run on the data, and that kind of thing. And what are some of the key takeaways that you get from from the findings. So it's ways to actually really, I guess, think about how across the whole life cycle of the project, from the research questions and the design of the instruments you're going to use through to the data analysis piece, what are the different touch points where the community or communities that you're working together with can have real input into the process, rather than the thin veneer of participation in quotes, which can actually be an extractive knowledge process where researchers provide some opportunity for community members to provide a little bit of input, but it ends up primarily still being about getting ideas and extracting those from the community, and then that benefits primarily the researcher when they publish their results.
Great. I just want to remind people that are tuning in that if you have any questions, to please let us know via Twitter with the hashtag DMLCommons, or to post them on the Etherpad. And Melissa, if we could hear from you now about one of your projects, and maybe keeping in mind some of the themes that Joanna and Sasha raised in terms of at which points participation was enabled, and how to kind of navigate that sometimes fine line between participation that is beneficial to participants versus participation that may end up being more extractive rather than productive or empowering. So if you could tell us about your experience, that would be great. I think you're on mute, Melissa, if you could unmute and start over.
Oh, there we go. Sorry, I didn't touch it, I promise. So just saying that was a really important point that Sasha raised. I think it's something we're grappling with at the moment. We're at the end of a project. We've just finished a participatory project, so we're in dissemination phase. And going back to the question that was posed by one of the listeners, I suppose, about what phases are more participatory than others, and I'll come to that, I suppose. But I think the dissemination phase can be quite tricky. It was something that we found. I'm going to speak about the Creating Hackney's Home project, which is a project that I was working on for the last 2 years here in London, in East London in particular. It has a longer life than that, actually. It started off with another project that I was working with a community organisation, Immediate Theatre, which is an estate-based youth theatre company. So I got to know some of the young people. The estates are generally social housing, although more mixed now in London. And most of the young people working with Immediate Theatre are from Africa and African Caribbean backgrounds, not exclusively, but that's their major constituency. And the area that I was working in, Hackney, is an area that I live, so I was interested just in what was happening in my neighbourhood, but also, I guess, a perfect storm for social scientists. You had the Olympics being held there. It's very close to the financial capital of the city itself in London, and also becoming a centre for the creative industry. So it's seen a lot of drivers of change. And it was also a site for the riots in 2011. We had a series of riots throughout London and also in other parts of the country. So just talking to some of the young people working on this in previous project, and getting a sense that for them one of the priorities was just what was happening into the built environment to change, and displacement being a key issue. And there's a lot written about gentrification, a lot written about regeneration projects, but in the literature there's very little actually about young people's experience of those processes. So that was the driver, I suppose. That was the overarching question, and how do young people feel? Questions of home and belonging being disrupted by all these processes of change. So starting with this broader idea of home, that enabled us, I guess, to have a fairly wide rubric under which we could have some flexibility. And I think one of the first challenges that we faced was writing the funding proposal, because with participatory research, as I'm sure you're aware, that your research questions should be set by the communities that you're working with, really, and or at least have some input into it. But our funding process here in the UK is that you should already delineate what your research questions and your outcomes are going to be. So that can be a tricky thing to navigate, and so you always have to have that caveat in funding proposals that obviously these research questions may change depending on the processes that we are involved in. Using Immediate Theatre as our hub, we were able to get young people who were interested in being involved in the project. We were lucky enough to get funding to actually pay them as casual research assistants, so that they were part of the team. We saw ourselves as a team. We had 5 research assistants, a research associate, and myself working on that team. And we had a 2.5-day workshop, which enabled us to work with the young people themselves to develop to redefine or refine, I guess, the research questions. And we came up with a set of about 4 or 5 research questions, which for them were the most important part, or the important themes that they wanted to focus on. It was a participatory visual project, and so the next stage was film training, and we worked with a professional film company, again based in Hackney in East London, to train, to work well. Training was very minimal, actually. It was, again, a participatory ethos within that film company. They basically handed the gear to the young people with some mentoring and saying, just go and explore, go and play. During the process of the training and facilitating those training workshops, the young people involved in the project came up with their own research themes. They wrote scripts for their films, they directed the films, they created the films, and each of the films was to reflect their experience of the changing urban environment in Hackney. It was very much, I guess, an iterative process, though. The films were just the first stage, so the young people were working with us over the course of a year. The first 3 months, 4 months was making the films over the summer 2013. And then following on from that, they were able to continue doing pieces of research that interested them. This question of analysis is an interesting one. Again, I think it's tricky, and it's something that I've tried in previous projects, not so successfully, and we did really make an effort on this project to try and incorporate our participants within the analytical process. And so we had regular meetings, initially one-on-one, and then we would have team meetings every 2 weeks or so. And then we would discuss themes that were coming up. We would talk about any experiences that they'd had, their research that they were doing, how their thinking was changing, with, I guess, the professional researchers always in the background, facilitating the process, prompting questions. The other part of this was that they had flip cams, so we would give them assignments to do, to think about, concepts to think about during the week as well, which they could record. Basically anything, something around those concepts or anything that caught their attention that week, that they were thinking about that week, their own learning processes within the project as well, and using flip cams to record that. It's part of the process of critical reflection as well. At the moment, we're in the process of, I guess, talking about the project, talking about the findings of the project, and as much as possible, the films that they produce and all the research that the young people involved in the project produced is available on the website, Hackney is Home. But we've kind of divided, I suppose, the work in some ways. We have the academic outputs, which require a certain style of writing, which the young people that were involved in the project aren't necessarily interested in engaging with. And why would they? Academic writing can be fairly dry, let's face it. Not as fun as making films. And so it's been we did initially have the idea that we would get involved in writing as well, that we would all sit together and write, at least on the public document, the report, which is available online as well. But even that process was quite difficult. We sent them drafts and things like that, but we didn't get much comment. But what they do seem to like is public screenings of the films. So we've had quite a few of those, and the people have been able to come along and talk about their films. We have been to one conference where one of the young filmmakers was able to come along and talk about the experience about his film. But in general, going back to this question about when are things more participatory than others, I would say that that's been the challenge for us, the writing up phase and the dissemination phase. And it's very interesting when you're at an academic conference and you're talking about your participatory project, but going back to what Sasha was saying, it's still me as a professional researcher talking about the project and still talking about what other young people were saying and our analysis of what they were saying. So there's a kind of a dilemma there as well. I'd say there's also a dilemma in terms of how participatory makes it participatory, because for some of our young people, they were quite happy. I mean, they could have run the project. Some of them, they just picked up the ideas and ran with it. But for others, they were quite happy to get more help, to get more support, to get more prompts. You know, particularly in terms of developing the content, developing their research, developing the films as well. So I guess it's just reflecting on. We might start off with the best of intentions with this idea of participation and all the reasons why we do it in terms of power and shifting those power relationships and thinking about extraction versus actual participation in a project. But for some people, particularly for young people, for them it's not such a big issue. It's not as big an issue for them as it is for us in some ways.
That's a really interesting point, Melissa, and I think it's something we can delve into as we talk a little bit more about some of the challenges that were identified in the original activity that we did. I just want to circle back to a minute to you, Joanna. If you could talk a little bit more about this topic that Melissa was covering towards the end of her discussion about the process of either analysis or refining what the final outputs of your projects are and some of the opportunities and challenges that you've experienced in that stage.
Yeah, I think it's definitely part of all kind of academic participatory research. I mean, you're constantly struggling or juggling with, different kind of actually stakeholder in your own project. So you have lots of audiences that you have to engage with. So and at the end of the day, you're asking, so for whom am I doing this participatory research, and for who should I kind of package it in different ways? Of course, I mean, we talked about the academic venues where you present the work in an academic way. That's one, fine. That's maybe your personal career outcome, whatever. But whenever you engage communities, or for example, in our case, it was members of the city of Helsinki, you have a huge responsibility towards the people you have, in a way taken time from or asked for their time contribution. So you cannot just leave it to participation for participation's sake and not have an actual outcome for the people you have engaged. So and it's often, I mean, I have found it's often difficult to find the right format of giving back, if you want. So let's say for a partner like the city of Helsinki, maybe in this project it was okay that the outcome was this piece of software, which they eventually didn't use as such, but they used when they created specifications for a similar platform that they had to ask for via a procurement process, etc. So okay, in that sense they got something out of this participation. But with the communities, my kind of personal, if you want, my personal grievance with some of the projects I've been involved in is that funding ends before you can really give back to the communities the maximum that you could give. And then you end up struggling, do I continue on my own just because I feel I'm indebted to these communities I've worked with, because I know that they really would need something more out of it, or then do I stop it because my work has stopped and I'm not paid for it anymore? So I have reached a point that I'm even wondering, is it okay to engage with communities if you are yourself not part of this community, or if you're yourself not at least willing to give of your own personal self, so not only as a researcher or a designer, but as a person really engaged with, or like kind of interested with the issues that these other people are dealing with. So it's still a kind of ongoing question and a quest for me to find the right answer.
Great, thank you. Melissa, if you could maybe continue to build on that and talk a little bit concretely in your experiences in terms of how to conceive of what the outputs are in a process that is frequently changing because it has a lot of participant involvement. So it changes throughout the process, perhaps, and then in terms of ensuring sort of that the mutual benefit of those outcomes is realized. And Sasha had made a note here in our comments that one idea is building funding for community orgs into grant proposals. So yeah, I'm wondering if you can comment concretely based on your experiences about examples of how to handle this this issue of outcomes.
Yeah, again, this is something that we have to take into account when we're putting in funding proposals. Here in the UK, there's a strong emphasis given to outcomes at the very beginning of a funding process. So you have to outline what you think are going to be your outcomes. One thing we did know was the films. That was clear. That was going to be the central part of the project. So, and we left it open as a research question actually within our funding proposal. We wanted to actually see how the films would be used. So we were able to use it to our advantage in some way, the uncertainty, by just saying, well, part of the experiment is to see how these films are picked up and used. And that's been really surprising for us. They've been used by all sorts of people in all sorts of different ways. They're Creative Commons, so anyone can use the films. That, of course, has other implications for questions around ethics and recognition, because our young people are all recognizable in the project. They're all there on film. So that's something that we've had to navigate and negotiate as we've gone through as well. So again, by keeping it very focused on the films as well, I guess that really helped us. I agree with Sasha about the building funding in for community organizations. I think that's something that we did as well. We had a lot of help from Immediate Theatre. We would have, they just made the process so much easier for us because they were a hub. The young people were familiar with them. They're in the middle of our research site, so everyone could converge there more easily. And if there were any problems, they had youth workers on site, and we were able to turn to them quite a lot. So they were a great support for us. And I'm also, I guess, on principle, a believer in paying our participants as well. If it's participatory, they're part of the team. But again, though, that can't always happen because of the site. We had a very small project in a way. We only had 5 people. I think Joanna and Sasha might have had a larger project, so there's different considerations there that need to be taken into account. I guess with outputs, by keeping it fairly vague, that kind of gave us flexibility to do things. And so for us, giving something back to the groups that we worked with was also about facilitating connections, which we can do as universities. Actually, we have, I hate to sound like a marketer, but we have a brand, and that brand can actually help us facilitate connections. So we've been able to work with the local council, the local borough authority. We were able to set up meetings between the young people in our team and to talk to policy committees, to talk about the experience of gentrification. The films were great in this regard too, because they're portable, very easy to show busy councillors and busy politicians what young people feel. They're very short films, 5 to 12 minutes is the longest one. So that was another thing I think that we were able to do in terms of our outputs, is really think about the connections that we could make, as well as all the other academic outputs. But for us, the policy side of things was really important. If we were going to I think, as Joanna says, you make a commitment. People are giving time and resources to the project. That's something that we could then give back as well.
Great, thank you. Sasha, maybe you can add to that. I see that there's some comments being added here within our chat that you can elaborate on in terms of juggling outputs for community groups, outputs that might be geared more towards an academic audience, and perhaps how to position yourself as a researcher trying to juggle those two things.
Yeah, sure. I mean, a couple things from the conversation, which is really a great conversation so far. One thing from the experience of the VOSCMOB project, the Mobile Voices project, Melissa, I'm sure you recall this, that there were moments when we were able to invite some of the community participants in the project to present with us in university and academic contexts, and that was something that actually they found really valuable. We weren't necessarily assuming that they were going to want to come, present in that kind of way about the work, but actually they were very excited by it because it was a chance for a certain kind of visibility for community members and community organizations, and that can have real power. It's not for every project necessarily, but I think certainly it's the responsibility of folks doing participatory research and participatory design projects to at least invite the community members to share in the presentations, and then they can sort of decide if they think that's valuable. Another step beyond that is to find resources to support community, community members to come to convenings and take part in the presentations. And that can be something you can also build into grants at the beginning potentially. So like travel costs for members of the community to come to a conference and present with you. I think the conversation is also in terms of thinking about this larger question of, well, where do the research questions come from, or where does the design challenge come from? You can also think about how can we, if you're based at a university, and I want to recognize in the conversation that not all designers or researchers are based in universities. Many of them are already coming from, from communities and doing their own work already. And sometimes the conversation about participatory research or participatory design just kind of starts from the assumption that everyone's a university-based researcher. But even if you are in a university, I think you can also shift your identity or your position from like, here I am, I'm an individual, advancing my career and my personal brand of visibility, and you can, if you shift that and you identify with particular social movements or social causes or whatever the case may be, however you frame that, if you become part of a broader network that already, that network already includes community-based organizations, then there's going to be research questions and design challenges that are coming out of the context of that shared movement work or that shared process of civic engagement. And then you can show up as somebody who has a particular skill set that you're willing to contribute to things that have been identified already by this larger social process.
I think that's a really excellent point about in terms of thinking a little bit outside of the academic box. If you're in academia, and of course if you're not in academia, you're perhaps not necessarily as confined by the traditions and culture of it. But I think it would be really helpful too to elaborate on, we have a question that came in, or a comment rather, that came up last week that Nancy Erbstein was talking about in terms of how to ensure that the outcomes of this kind of work has the greatest impact, particularly if one of our goals is policy impact. So one of the issues that she raised was that she had challenges in her youth-based research of convincing policymakers that outcomes from a small sample of youth and youth researchers were in fact significant and represented significant problems in the community, and that their solutions that they were identifying were relevant and potentially very effective solutions. So I was wondering, I'm going to put this out to any of you that wants to comment on this question of how to use usually small, by academic standards, for lack of a better word, sample sizes, or a small group of people producing knowledge, and convince larger communities or policymakers that knowledge can and should be acted upon.
Yeah, well, it was certainly something that we thought about from the beginning of the project. And I guess for us, while we had 5 young people involved in the team and actively participating in producing the films and producing the knowledge, I guess, for the project, the data for the project, they were involved in their own research. So they were talking to their friends, they were talking to their family, they were doing vox pops in the street, they were doing their own research. So there was a cascading effect. So we were able to put it to policymakers that, okay, it's a small team that's been working on this, but those films capture the experience of many different people within this particular borough. And in that way, we were able to demonstrate that while it might seem like a small project, it actually has a much wider impact, and it's actually capturing the experience, a much wider experience. And plus, again, I think it was the advantage of the films because they're publicly screened. We could show them to other youth groups, so we got more data that way. We showed them to other youth groups, to other. They've been shown to older people in the borough. They've been shown to, let's say, to councillors, policymakers. They've been shown in all sorts of different places to other researchers, other artists, other filmmakers in the public screenings. And so at those events, we also gather quite a bit of data, and the films seem to have captured a general feeling about the anxieties of change that are happening in the borough. And because of that resonance, we have been able to get the policymakers, I think, to take the outputs quite seriously, take the film and the young people very seriously. As I say, they've actually called on the young people to actually give evidence at various commission hearings. So that's been, I think, one of the really good outcomes. But we did have a hook. We did have the films, I think, the hook in terms of people's concerns about gentrification across the board in this particular part of London.
That's really interesting in terms of thinking about different ways of packaging the learnings and ideas that come out of this work, and how the different ways of packaging it might open different doors and have varying kind of outcomes. I don't know if, Joanna, you want to add to that, or Sasha. And I would also say that I know that there are some people that are interested in this conversation who are based in an academic setting and who struggle with getting this kind of work sort of recognized within that context. So thinking both outside of academia and inside these different modes of packaging the outcomes of this kind of work most effectively.
Just to continue on something that Melissa mentioned, that, this kind of snowballing effect, in a way that, if you're dealing with a small number of people, but they have their own networks and they're kind of doing their own work with others. It also happened in the case of that I was mentioning at the beginning, when this group of active residents decided to use the platform we were designing, and actually they used it to ask other residents of the neighborhood for information related to traffic safety in their neighborhood. So from a small group of people, they managed to get valuable information from a bigger group in the same neighborhood. And they actually also contacted the representatives of the city of Helsinki responsible for this area and showed them what they had done. And I thought the response of the city officials was interesting in that sense, that they said, yes, this is a great job, because we can see that basically you have collected the information from all the other residents, and for us this is very valuable, that we're not now just dealing with you as a small group of people, but the fact that you have extended kind of yourselves to include the other residents was valuable. And actually this case became cited by the officials as a good example to follow for other neighborhoods, that if you want to do something kind of in a participatory way and try to influence the way the city works, then that's a good way to go. So I mean, I don't know if it answers exactly what you were saying, but it's definitely a continuation on Melissa's example.
Sasha, did you want to add anything to this?
No, that's okay.
Okay, great. Well, I think, and I see some notes coming up within our chat here too that it would be great to elaborate on in terms of what do you recommend to young or early career scholars who are doing some of this kind of work and are still at the same time trying to have their work recognized within more traditional terms within academia? Do you have suggestions for that in terms of publishing or other ways of having the work distributed that is still in sort of the spirit of the project itself?
I mean, I would have something to say on that. I guess I would urge younger researchers to get involved with social movement in an area that they really care about, that moves them, whether it's because of their own sort of personal, it affects them personally or for whatever reason, and to just get engaged in one of the many, vibrant social movements that exists, ecology, LGBTQ organizing, feminism, I mean, all of them intersect, of course, workers' rights, and, urban redesign, gentrification, police violence and brutality and resistance, race. Anyway, so get involved in a social movement and then just kind of show up with the research skills or the design skills that you're building and bring them to the table within the context of movement groups and organizations that you're actually a part of. That way, those skills that you're developing as a researcher or designer can become sort of most valuable and most grounded and most useful to the broader process of social change.
Great. Well, we're nearing the hour, so I wanted to wrap up with each of you kind of sharing a kind of final piece of advice or takeaway, perhaps having to do in particular with the possibilities for digital media and learning research, as I know some of our audience is obviously primarily focused on that. If you have any suggestions on that front, or if you wanted to pick up on the topic that we touched on throughout in terms of what are some of the limits of participation and how do you navigate productive participation versus extractive participation. So Joanna, if you want to start.
Yes, well, actually, I want to continue on Sasha's suggestion, which I think is really excellent, and it's something I have followed myself in my own path. So, as I was telling you, the project I was talking to you about at the beginning, it was very much more this kind of pushing for participation. So I was in my own role as a participatory designer that was desperately trying to get people involved in the project. All with, it's good. I'm not saying it's bad, and it should be done. It's useful, but right now I kind of a bit change strategies. I'm, as Sasha was saying, I'm kind of following what urban community is doing here in Aarhus, and they're, the more I look at what they're doing, the more I'm surprised and in awe of what people do without the use of participatory designers. We're not always needed in that sense that we have to push always for people coming our way. So people themselves are doing very interesting stuff, and as Sasha was saying, I think we can contribute with that, with the skills we have to these endeavors that are already going and that are also successful, but might need a special kind of help that we might give. So that's my take on it right now. Thank you.
Yes, and I think I would just really agree with Joanna and Sasha. I think in terms of early career research, don't be afraid of trying this as a method. Again, as with all methods, it's whatever you think is going to best capture what it is that you're trying to do, that you're aiming for, and I mean, it's just great fun as well. I mean, or it can be. I mean, it's time intensive. It can be, as I said at the initial question that Alicia set up, the initial challenge. Time is a huge factor here. You have to spend building those relationships is really crucial. But I think once you've got them, it's a really rewarding experience, and not to be worried about some of the feedback that it's very difficult to publish in this area, etc., etc. Because I think it's clearly a growing area. There's a really strong stream of writing in this area now, and I don't think that's something that should put people off.
Excellent. Thank you all so much for that, and it was nice to end on a kind of a positive and an encouraging note. There, not only about the kind of personal benefits of doing participatory research, but also perhaps the ethical, not requirement, but the ethical push to do so as well. So I'm pleased to think that we've covered both the challenges and the opportunities of this kind of research, and also that Melissa Butcher sort of outlined that any method sort of is as good as the rigor to which you bring to it, and the match between what you do and what it is that you want to find out, and who it is that you want to work with and what they want to find out. So without reifying, we can't sort of reify methods without kind of reflecting critically on whether or not they're actually fit for purpose with what we're doing. So we're going to end there. Obviously, there's more questions and more thoughts that everyone will have, and we can keep this conversation going on Twitter using the hashtag DMLCommons. I just want to quickly thank our speakers, Sasha, Joanna, and Melissa, very much for this very interesting and multifaceted discussion. Thank you to all of you who are watching this live or will watch it after the fact, and to those of you who have participated already on Etherpad and on Twitter, which will remain up. Thanks to Jameson from the DML Hub for organizing the technical side of things. This concludes Unit 2 of the DML Commons Professional Pathways, but coming up soon is Unit 3, which covers academic writing and publishing, which I'm sure will cover some of the issues that we started talking about here in terms of the academic outputs and career trajectory. And then following that is Unit 4, which covers academic career paths and also alternatives to academic careers. And for many of us, there may be some hybrid version of both of those for digital media and learning scholars. So in the meantime, please feel free to add to the pool of resources and projects that we already have going on Twitter and on this Etherpad. We'd really like it if you could share any examples of participatory and community-based research that you may already be involved in or that you've come across and look interesting. Either websites or journal articles or anything, resources that others might use. And again, the Twitter feed is hashtag DMLCommons, and the Etherpad will remain up. If you want to keep updated about the future DML Commons salons, which are not only this strand on professional pathways, but also the design research strand, which covers some similar and some different issues for those of you who are interested in design, please sign up for the newsletter at the dmlcommons.net website or follow DML Commons on Twitter at DML Commons. Thank you all very much for an enlightening and very multifaceted hour, and look forward to the next unit.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.